Are you ready to improve your health without the unrealistic BS? You're tuning in to Healthy Not Hungry, the podcast that believes that health begins in your mind. I'm your host, clinical nutritionist, PT, and mental health enthusiast Rach, and I'm so excited to have you join me. Hello and welcome to another episode of Healthy Not Hungry. I'm your host Rach. Thank you so much for joining us today. So today I'm very excited because we are joined by the lovely Dr. Tina Schermer Sellers. So she is a licensed sex and gender feminist psychotherapist, best-selling author, researcher, emeriti professor, and media personality whose expertise spans sex therapy, spiritual intimacy, parenting, medicine, and social justice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tina.
Thanks, Rach. I'm so glad to be here with you.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting topic. So to get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you came to be where you are, I guess?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I sort of began my career actually teaching junior high and high school. And then from noticing what was going on in kids' lives, I decided to go back to school and study marriage and family therapy so I could understand sort of what was going on there. From there, I ended up in medical family therapy, looking at the impact of illnesses on people's lives. I also went and did extra study in sexuality and became licensed as a sex therapist because I realized that doctors and therapists both don't get training in sexuality and sexual health. And yet, that's a pretty intimate part of our lives, integrated part of our lives. And I thought, I don't think that's helping people to go see healthcare professionals who don't have training in that area. And I think it became especially pertinent to me because in the United States, anyway, we haven't had comprehensive sex education. In fact, we've had abstinence only education since the 1980s, which we now know was medically inaccurate and it was widespread across the United States. And so a lot of our clinicians, that was their growing up too. They didn't get real information. What they got was from their friends and from the media. And so it was so pervasive across the US that what I was seeing in clients and grad students, I was seeing the impact of a lot of sexual shame and sexual misinformation across their lives and how that then was beginning to impact not just their growing up, not just their adolescence, but now their adult lives and their adult relationships. And when they turned to professionals, those professionals didn't have training in that either. And so I ended up just doing a huge deep dive in that area, thinking we have to be better trained as professionals. But we also need to really start understanding why comprehensive sex education is preventative for kids and adults in just owning themselves, owning the gift of pleasure and connection in their lives, that it's a good thing, and really knowing how to dispel so much of the mythology that drives our economy, right, in ways that are hurtful to people. And so that just became a huge part of my career and my writing, my speaking in my life. And I'll probably, even though I've got other things I'm interested in and I do as well, I'll probably stay on this bandwagon the rest of my life because we're just not changing things fast enough at all, especially in the US. If anything, we're going backwards. So I just think kids deserve better and we all deserve better.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. It's interesting because in Australia, it's quite similar, like depending on the school you went to, some schools were quite comprehensive in sex education and some were not. I went to quite a religious school and it really was not covered at all. And same thing, you got that sense of shame around it. And so it's interesting. And I guess you're right, like with what's going on in the world, like we won't dive into politics, but especially in your country, you're right, there is a lot of things that are going backwards at the moment. And I think it's really important that these younger generations can grow up,
Right.
feeling empowered about themselves rather than confused and shamed and all the
Mhm.
things you don't want for your kid, I guess.
Yeah, no, really true. And I think a lot of times people, again, are under these mythologies that if I talk about it, somehow my kids are going to do things more dangerous. And actually, the research has always shown the opposite. And it makes sense in every other area. We give kids what they need to be equipped to make good decisions, right? We help them know how to cross streets. We help them know how to take care of their bodies. We help them know how to drive a car safely. And we give them the education so that they are equipped to protect themselves. This is one area that has to do with how we protect our bodies, how we make choices for our bodies, how we draw boundaries, how we respect other people's boundaries, how we know ourselves, how we stand up for ourselves, how we do intimacy and bonding with people we care about. These are core to a human's happiness. And we absolutely ignore equipping children, adolescents, and then adults with the information they need. And instead, in America, we drive our economy on things like making people feel badly about themselves so they go spend money on things,
Yeah.
right? And that doesn't serve them well at all. Because we haven't given them the ideas that'll help them go, oh yeah, that's a cool thing, but that's not going to make me happier. Or I don't
No.
feel bad about that part of myself. I don't need that thing in order to feel good about myself. Like we haven't been equipping people to really claim happiness in their life, and instead they give it over to late stage capitalism, for example, without even realizing it.
Yeah, definitely. So you've kind of already started to touch on it, but that was like the main thing I did want to chat to you about today was how do you think, sexuality, our own sexuality, what role does that have in our health and well-being?
Yeah, well, we have to understand what falls under the umbrella of sexuality.
Yes.
And there's a lot of things that we often don't talk about. In fact, when we talk about sex education, people are like, oh my gosh, how could you do sex education with a 5-year-old? And you're like, well, what are 5-year-olds interested in? They're interested in themselves. They're interested in their own bodies. Often interested in somebody else's body, like, how's your body different from mine? They're interested in their world and will labeling the world. And so they deserve to get what is age appropriate for them. And part of that is knowing a bit about who you are. And then 6, and then 7, and then 8. Having somebody answer your questions with respect and honesty, right? Based on what your developmental curiosity is. And so for little ones, it's things like body autonomy. Who's in charge of your body? Who's in charge of your sister's body, your brother's body, your mom's body, right? We learn about boundaries and autonomy. We learn about what being kind is, what being unkind is. Why is kindness important? So, and we're forming our values, and people are, this is all under the umbrella of sex education. What's important to you? How do you like to be treated? How do you not like to be treated? Do you ever treat people in ways that you wouldn't want to be treated? Let's talk about that, right? It's teaching them, giving them emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, and body intelligence. We also teach them things about, like, as they get older, about what's exploitation. When is somebody trying to take advantage of somebody else? Why do you think they would want to do that? And then we help them develop the media literacy to recognize that in our media. When is our media trying to take advantage of people? What if they were to believe that, and so it's really an integrated type of human intelligence that we're doing, emotional, relational, body, and then as we get older, sexual intelligence. So what is that? Well, what is pleasure to me? What do I like and what don't I like? Right? Can it be okay that I like what I like and I don't like what I don't like? I remember reading a book to one of my granddaughters when she was like 4, and it was on Doug doesn't like to hug. Don't hug
Yeah.
Doug, it was called. And it was just this great story about this little guy that didn't like to be hugged, and the only person he wanted to hug from was his mom at the end of the day.
Oh.
But in the book, throughout the book would be like, well, grandma likes to hug, but Doug doesn't, and that's okay. Like we all have things we like and we have things that we don't like. We have things that are pleasurable, tastes
Mm.
that we like, sounds we like, whatever, and then things that aren't. Well, what is the role of pleasure in our life as
Yeah.
humans, right? And what's the role of connection, feeling safe, feeling loved, knowing how to give safety and love to someone else? Really, when you're looking at how people build happiness, it is often about how well they do connection and pleasure, intimacy, bonding, in their life. I had the blessing of working in oncology for a decade. And what my patients taught me was that whether they had a diagnosis that was going to kill them or not, the fact that somebody had said the word cancer in their life now meant that they were thinking about their life differently. And they started to get really clear about what was really important to them and what was not. And what people taught me is that what was important was the quality of their relationships. That
Mm.
was more important than the stuff they had, the accomplishments they had done, whatever. It really came down to, I want a better relationship here. I really appreciate my relationship here. I get so much joy from my relationship here. Really, so much of our human happiness comes down to the strength and well-being of our relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely that connection is huge. And it's interesting that you say, when someone gets a diagnosis, they consider, well, what matters to me. I know, like from personal experience, obviously not being down that, but I think when you experience a really traumatic and bad relationship, it
Yeah.
really makes you think about and appreciate. Whereas I think prior to this, when I was a teenager, for example, you say with little kids, like learning what's pleasurable and what's not, what you enjoy, which is okay, and what you don't, somewhere along the line that can get lost. And I
Yes.
know for me as a teenager, that 100% got lost.
Yes.
And then in relationships, that got lost. And then it wasn't until I hit rock bottom with one that I
Yes.
started to consider what's actually important and what do I want. And yeah, you just talking about that, I was like, oh, wow, there really is a journey here, isn't there?
There really is. And if you walk alongside as a child and adolescent is developing, you can help them gain some of those skills, some of those questions, some of those reflections as they're going along the way. Things like what invites people to lose their awareness of what they like and don't like. Well, we start
Yeah.
to look at, what does media say to women? It isn't about you. It's
Mm,
about, and often it's in a heterosexual context, right? It's about him. It's not about you. And it's about what they think about you. It isn't about you. So you need to be what they want you to be, not who you are. And without even realizing it, you start trading yourself in,
yeah.
right? And trying to be something else because you're like, well, it can't be enough that it matters to me. Well, it can. And if you've got somebody alongside you that's just kind of been questioning along the way, like, I'm hearing you talk a lot about what they like, but I'm not hearing you talk about what you like. What do you like?
Mm,
Tell me, and do they see that? Do you think they would celebrate that in you, or do you think they'd make fun of you if you
yeah.
shared that with? So you help kids ask the questions that help them notice the messages that are coming through a patriarchal capitalistic culture that are inviting them to let go of the brilliance that's them.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think, yeah, most kids naturally, have that curiosity and ability, especially if they're nurtured in that environment, to say what they like and what it is. And I guess it's like, at what point does that change? Like, at what point do we need to be nurturing to stop that change? Because I know for, you and I were briefly discussing this before we jumped on, but I know for myself and plenty of other women out there that, like, our wants and needs, we don't even consider them, particularly when it comes to intimacy and
Right.
sexuality. It's like a forgotten thing at some point of what do we want and what do we need and how do we say that?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And a piece of it is that it hasn't been nurtured along the way. The awareness wasn't nurtured along the way. The critique of the culture that we were in wasn't, engaged or engaged in an active conversation along the way. And so we get kind of swallowed up by it without even really kind of realizing it. But also there's pieces of like education, like for example, we can absorb the idea that sexual desire is spontaneous always. And we can think back and we can think, oh, I felt that here at the beginning of this relationship or in this relationship, or, guys are supposed to want it all the time, whatever. But actually, the way we respond to desire is also unique. For some people, it can be really spontaneous. They can be shopping for potatoes and then go, oh, sex would be really fun. right now. Like out of the blue, potatoes aren't
Yeah.
particularly sexy, but for many people, and research suggests up to 60% or more like 80% of women, after they've been in a relationship like 6 months or more, have what we call responsive desire. And plenty of men do too. And they're thinking about potatoes. They're not thinking about sex, but someone that they care about or something that they hear begins to like cause their body to respond. Right. And so they get a little bit of, someone kisses them on the neck or does a particular something that sort of softens where their head is, and they get a hunch, but it's because their body has already begun responding before their head got on board.
Yeah.
Right. And then their head gets on board and they're going, well, maybe I could go there. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that we call that responsive desire, and that is very normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But I certainly have treated a lot of people that have come in where somebody said, something's wrong with my partner because they don't want sex naturally on their own, or there's something wrong with me because I don't, right?
Mm.
And oftentimes I'm like, well, let's just talk about how much time do you make for things you love, like things that bring you pleasure. Well, I really don't. I'm just so busy. I'm a list follower. I do da da da. And say, but you know what? I'm wondering what you're losing experience wise in your life because you're not making space for just pleasure, like a really good meal or a really nice walk in the woods or whatever works for you. Pleasure is a part of the human experience that making time for it is valuable to your whole nervous system, to your whole health and well being. And I'm wondering if the quality of your life would improve if you began to be a little bit more diligent with just making space for pleasure. That's an umbrella conversation over the conversation of let's talk about what kind of touch you like. And a touch makes you feel safe, feels joyful, and then can you imagine making space for that for you?
Mm.
And a lot of women are privileging everything and everyone else but themselves. They're last on their list, and they
Definitely.
deserve to not be last on their list.
Yeah, no, I can completely attest to that. It's one of those things too. I know if I am so busy and up in my own head and, not taking time for myself for little things, whether that's going to a dance class or honestly just sitting out in the sun and looking up at the sky, little things, there's no way I am thinking about anything intimate. Whereas if I've set back a bit and I'm not so in my head, it might arise. There might be like that, oh, okay, this might be something I want to do. But yeah, I think it's so easy to get so caught up in the never ending to do list of life, especially depending on the season you're in. But yeah, there's definitely seasons where there's always something to do. So you've got to make that
Absolutely.
time to do
Yeah.
things for you.
Right. And I think, when you live in a patriarchal capitalist society, it's about swallowing up your time. It's about convincing you need to spend every minute on these other things so that you can have XYZ, blah, 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 right? And we don't stand back very often and say, but am I getting joy? Do I have joy? Am I finding joy? Am I making space for joy? Rest, looking at the stars, looking at the sky, listening to the birds, whatever it is that helps your body and your nervous system feel like you're living with intention. I think that that is part of what we all need to be encouraging each other to go meta, go above the discourses of what we're living in and question whether, gosh, if I was to only live another week, am I living the life I mean to live?
Mm.
And if not, what are the changes I want to make in order to live more of that life?
Yeah, it's a question I think a lot of people don't even take the time to consider. Like, I had this conversation only yesterday. I met up with my cousin for coffee, funnily enough. And I was saying, like, I'm feeling a bit burnt out at the moment. And I said, so I'm taking some time back. Like, I'm having mornings where I'm sitting and having a coffee, and then I'm going to a Pilates class and I'm coasting. And she said to me, she goes, Rach, you're actually allowed to coast, right? Like there's nothing wrong, because I was feeling a little guilty about it. I'm like, oh, I could be working more, or there's a million other things that are on the to-do list that could be getting done.
Yeah.
And she's just like, you've worked your butt off for like the last 10 years. You've gone through a lot of stuff. She's like, so what if you take time to coast? She's like, if it makes you happy and you're
Exactly.
adding quality to your life and you're not burning out, she's like, isn't that the point? And I'm like, well, when you put it like that, yeah, that makes total sense. But it's so easy to get in our head and almost like reprimand ourselves and be like, oh no, you can't take that time for yourself. Like, how dare you?
Yes, exactly. And you're not alone with that. A lot of women talk about that, and I think part of our role in each other's lives is to have the kind of conversation you had with your cousin yesterday. It's to be that person witnessing on the outside and saying, yeah, but I wonder this for you.
Mm,
And the other one going, yeah, I wonder this for you too, and we help each other live a better life, and not be so, I don't know, kind of absent-minded about how we're following the narratives of our culture that would have us be busy all the time and in our head all the time. That kind of thing is just, it's it takes from us, and that's what I think I was noticing in cancer patients, because they were waking up to it and they were
yeah.
like, oh, no, it's going to be different from here on out. If there's any chance my life could be shorter, which of course they didn't know any more than you or I know, you
Yeah.
know, but it just felt like it because they had had that word cancer applied to their health at a particular point. One of the things I like to think about is that our right brain is the part of our brain that goes online when we're itty bitty and is online until our left brain, our language brain, kind of comes on at 18 months to 2 years, right? And so our right brain, that is creative and that is playful and all of that. A lot of times, the way that capitalist societies are set up, it's like we squish people's right brain down after they get older. And we're like, the only thing that matters is living out of your left brain and the brain and your do, and
Mm,
accomplishment and blah, blah. And so all the playfulness, all the giggling, all the sitting and, like building something for the sake of building it, but not for the end result, all the things we did naturally as children when we were embracing joy, right? If we were
yeah.
allowed to, if we were safe enough to, that's what we also keep squishing down in adults' experience. And I really think at the core of who we are about connection, safe, loving connection, and sharing pleasure with our friends, with ourselves, and that a good part of what makes life meaningful comes out of those places. But if
Mm,
we look at how we're spending our time like a pizza, how much is actually going to connection and pleasure? And how
mm.
much is going to the to-do list and I should and if I don't and all those other things. And I think we just need to be having these conversations where we invite each other to think about, am I living the life I want to look back on and say, yeah, that's the life I wanted to live.
No, definitely. It's so easy when you look at kids. I look at my daughter and she's so creative and just spends hours making things out of nothing. And the things she comes up with, it's incredible. But I was the same as a kid. And, I was thinking about it recently. I'm like, my sister said to me, she goes, you don't do as much creative things as you used to. And I'm like, you're right. And she's like, so when are you getting back into it then? And, it's taking those moments to really sit back and assess and think about like, why aren't I doing the things that used to give me so much joy? And maybe it's because there's no end result or it doesn't contribute to something. But I think it's learning to be okay with the fact that we can do things that fill our souls without it
Yes.
needing to tick a box, contribute to something, progress us forward. But I do think that's a big part of the society we're in, is that, you've got to move forward, you've got to keep going. And it's like, what if you just take the moment to sit there and enjoy it?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I I got really involved in looking at the impact of sexual shame, whether you were just in a culture where they were teaching abstinence education, or whether you were also interfacing with a conservative religious community in one way or another, but just really looking at it. And I was a part of a person's dissertation committee back in 2017, and she was looking at what's the operational definition of sexual shame. What is it? And we didn't have one. Like Brene Brown had done beautiful work on what shame was, and it really has made it a household word, thank goodness.
Mm.
We didn't have anything on shame really much before her, but we didn't really have sexual shame. So, is sexual shame different? What is it? And all of that. And so, she did a really wonderful piece of research. The vast majority of the people that she interviewed, they were all adults over 21. Very few of them were from religious homes, but what she found out in the definition was that religious shame was pervasive in her study group, pervasive, had a pervasive impact on people's ability to do connection and pleasure well, so to do bonding, to do intimacy well, and that it hurt them at the very places where you need to do intimacy. So I'm happy to share that with you and with your audience, because I think when we understand the impact of sexual shame and we understand sexual shame a little better, then we're able to combat it more in our own life, right? And start to claim ourselves and our what we deserve to experience. So I'll share it with you. Sexual shame is a visceral feeling. So in your body, not just here in your head, a visceral feeling of humiliation and disgust toward one's own body and identity as a sexual being, and a belief of being abnormal, inferior, and unworthy. So it affects your very core self-esteem, if you will, your sense of value. This feeling can be internalized, but it also manifests in interpersonal relationships, which is where it begins. And one of the things I've come to believe is that sexual shame is our first shame for most people. And that's because little ones are discovering their genitals about 11 to 12 months old when they're getting their diapers changed or they're in the tub. They now know how to reach for something. Their hands aren't just like clobbering them like they are when they're infants. And they find their genitals. And I always say that is a glorious day for them, because we have so many wonderful nerve endings in that part of our body. What kids need at that point is somebody to say, yep, that's your penis. It's a wonderful part of you. Or, yep, that's your vulva. It's a wonderful part of you. Now let's finish diapering you, whatever, drying you off, whatever the deal is. And then every time it's teaching them a little bit more, right? They're not going to stop touching, because it's a wonderful part of their body. They're not going to stop touching it there. And they're going to be too young, from like 1 to 2.5 to really get, oh, I'm going to go in my room or go in the bathroom, right? They're not going to get that yet. And so you're just doing, at first you're just like covering up their hands, or you're getting them back dressed. They've got diapers on half the time until they're 2 or something anyway. And so you're just like, yep, that's your wonderful part of your body. Just like so many parts of your body. I love your nose. I love your eyes. You're just normalizing that that's just another part of their body. And then as they're getting a little bit older, then you're able to say, that really special part of your body, when we feel like we want to touch it, we usually go to our own room, or we go to a room, or we go to the bathroom. And we all do that in the family. Your parents do it, everybody. And that's just, and it's a social rule or a social norm we're teaching them. They want to pick their nose. We tell them, get a Kleenex, don't eat your boogers. We are teaching them, social norms. That's what they need. But instead, what they are getting is kind of or yelling or slapping their hand away, or somebody saying, that's dirty, that's gross, don't do that, or God won't love you, all kinds of things like that. So it begins very young, interpersonally, and happens over and over and over and over again until they're like 4, and they start to get to go underground with it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how pervasive it is. But here's the thing, it has a negative impact. So constant sexual shame has a negative impact on trust, communication, and physical and emotional intimacy. So how well we feel we deserve to be loved and touched and hugged and affirmed and our ability to feel trust in the world or people to trust us. There's really effects in these very core places in us. It goes on to say sexual shame develops across the lifespan, like I was talking about, in interactions with interpersonal relationships. But then one's culture and society lays its layer of shame on you, right?
Mm.
Through advertisements and how we run all of that. And then that creates a subsequent critical self-appraisal. So that gets an internal critic going. What I got from all the people in my life that I love, and then what I got from culture started an internal critic that goes on tormenting me the rest of my life unless I do something about that.
Mm.
Right? So that's a feedback loop. Then it just goes on to say there is also a fear and uncertainty related to one's power or right to make decisions, including safety decisions related to sexual encounters, along with an internalized judgment toward one's own sexual desire. So I don't feel like I'm desirable, right? It's been so shamed. And yet, if we're going to claim connection and pleasure with ourselves and with somebody else, if we wish, we need to see ourselves as desirable. That's not our partner's job to fill, right?
No.
We've got to feel that, right? And so you can really see how in this definition, it affects every area of
Mm.
your ability to do intimacy, connection, and pleasure, right? And that's why so many of us struggle with it in our adult lives. So
Mm.
20 to 80, we struggle with this, and we also don't have a lot of people that are talking about it and helping us know how to do it, which was why I wrote the 2 books that I did. Like, what can I do to support you in healing and understanding it? And then how to get the sex education developmentally that
Yeah.
the 2-year-old inside of you and the 4-year-old inside of you, that,
Didn't get.
that all of you need.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's interesting how you've like put that timeline for us to explain really where it begins, and it's so true, and you can see that then by the time someone's an adult, how, formed these patterns are. And I guess from here, like, where does someone begin? So like if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, yeah, I can relate, where's a good starting point?
Yeah, one of the things I often recommend is, and this is a funny thing, the second book I wrote is called Shameless Parenting: Everything You Need to Raise Shame-Free, Confident Kids and Heal Your Shame Too. I'll often say, I wrote that for the parents that were like, I don't want to do to my kid what was done to me. Help me. I don't know. And I'm like, I got you. I've been teaching this to physicians and therapists for forever. I will write you something and make it just so simple. Like, here's what you need to know when they're birth to 2. Here's what you need to know when they're 2 to 4, 4 to 6. Here's the top books. Like, I'm going to hold your hand through the whole thing. I'm often saying to people who are wanting to heal and who didn't get any of this, like, go and read that book and
Mm.
imagine you're first talking to the infant part of you, for the young little toddler part of you, and go get those kids' books in the library and read them to yourself. Because you have a little part of you. And this isn't just hocus pocus kind of idea. I mean, we are a compilation of our ages,
Mm.
always, right? And then go on to the 2 to 4 and the 4 to 6 and read the books. And then what you're going to do is, in learning this stuff, you're going to dispel the myths that you adopted that you didn't even know you adopted. You're going to have
Mm.
so many aha moments like, oh my gosh, it would have been so great if I had somebody read this book to me. I think I would have thought this and felt this instead of this, kind of a thing.
Mm.
And so you're going to feel the shame begin to come off of you, and the liberation, the freedom that you start to feel when you feel less shame. It's like you have lost 20 pounds. Like, you just feel lighter, you know?
Yeah.
You also feel more informed. And you might have times where you feel grief because you didn't get it, or you feel anger and a little betrayed, because nobody was there to sort of run interference for you and the culture was making you feel terrible or whatever. But I do feel like walking yourself through your own timeline can be such a healing thing to do. I talk about in the first book, in Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, Erasing Shame from Sexual Intimacy, I talk about in that book of a model of healing called Healing the Mess, the model for erasing sexual shame, MESS. And I talk about frame, name, claim, and aim. And frame is get yourself a frame or scaffolding of sex education. And you can get that with that other book. And then name is telling your story to somebody that you trust who's going to listen to your story, or a group of friends even, and say, me too. Like, yeah, that was really hard, huh? And you find out you're not alone. You
Mm.
are so not alone, right? And then claim is begin to do the hard work of taking your body back. I
Yeah.
don't care how your body is, your heredity determines much more about the shape of your body and so many other things about your body than anything else. And I'm almost a full-blooded Swede, and I am stocky like every other woman I know in my family. Like, we just are, like, we can survive famines, I'm sure of it. But this is how we are, but we literally run our economy on making you feel bad. Recent research was saying 60% of 6-year-olds, two-thirds of 9-year-olds, and 90% of 15-year-old girls are already modifying their diet because they are convinced they're not okay. And this
Well,
is
it's
simply from
heartbreaking.
absorbing media.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely heartbreaking.
It
That
is
those
heartbreaking. It's
numbers.
absolutely heartbreaking. Yeah. And it's why I'm like, we got to start these conversations when they're littler, like, and with the younger parts of ourselves, because we've been inundated with this stuff most of our lives.
Yeah, definitely. I think in Australia at the moment we've got had a massive wake up call. I don't know if you guys get this on the news, but there's been a lot of like pedophile cases of people working in childcare centres, and we're talking like hundreds of cases, not just 10 or so. And it really makes you think twice. But I think the biggest thing is, and this is something I started with my daughter when she was quite little, was talking about your parts, what they're called, who's allowed to touch them, who shouldn't touch them, like, and just having, like you said, the boundaries, like starting that early. But then there's so many people who don't, because they're like, oh, they don't need to know about it. But it's like, you're empowering your kid to realize that it's okay for them to have boundaries from a really young age. And it's,
Yeah.
yeah, but I think that's changing a lot in Australia right now, because a lot of parents are horrified. They're like, oh my goodness, like, you think your kid's safe going somewhere like that. And
Yeah.
it's the work we do at home to prepare them for situations that I
Yeah.
think is so important.
Well, and this is what's tricky about that, I think, is that when we come to sex ed through sexual assault, we can overstress
Mm,
that it's dangerous,
yeah.
that people are dangerous, and that people could hurt us, and that and we forget the side of your body is magnificent. It
Mm,
is an incredible organism. Like, it has so many cool things about it. Look at all these things you can do, and all these things you can feel, and all these, look at what your five senses can do. We've got to balance the message out with the truth. We also have to not put the onus of change on children. The onus
definitely.
of change and education needs to go on every single person that has access to children,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
And so we have to start sex education and do sex education with the people that are working with children that have never gotten the sex education. And to them, scare them.
Mm,
We say, when you touch a child inappropriately, you take away that child's innocence and ability to develop at their own pace, which every child deserves.
definitely.
And we will have a zero tolerance rule for anybody that hurts children in any significant way, which includes touching them when they're not old enough to give permission,
Yeah.
right? And you guys hear enough about what's going on over here. We're talking about this stuff all the time, but we've been talking about what's been happening in churches, what's been happening. Basically, white men mostly are the offenders, right? But we haven't ever started the sex education. We haven't really had a zero tolerance rule. We continue to blame the victim in college assaults, campus situations. We haven't done the other side of the education that we've needed to do. And so we still are having the stuff happen all the time to kids, and there are adults that are taking advantage of it. We had a politician just a week ago make a comment, just sort of flyby comment about it's normal to be attracted to prepubescent girls.
Right.
No, I'm sorry, it's not. And to normalize that when we have people that don't even know how to have boundaries for themselves or how to protect other people or anything, it's frightening. It's
Well,
frightening.
yeah, especially when the wrong things are getting normalized. Like
Yeah,
it's,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But it is the tricky that sort of needle to thread with our little ones because we don't want to be scaring them, but we
Mm,
do want to be equipping them, you
definitely.
know? So we have just as many conversations about what if somebody said this to you, what would you say? About how you say no or who do you go for help and who's trustworthy. And we have just as many of those as we have what's your favorite thing to eat and what brings you lots of pleasure or what makes you happy or this is a wonderful part of your body. And yeah, we're going to keep our clothes on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, just celebrating the upsides of being human.
I think that's, yeah, it's a tricky balance. I know I've always found it with my daughter because she's quite an anxious thinker,
Mm.
like naturally. So, when we've ever had these conversations about stranger danger and things like that, it is highlighting both sides that, you need to be aware, you need to be safe, and this is how to do that. But on the same note, there are lots of people who are safe. There are lots of people who are there for you. And I
Yes.
think it's bringing both areas to light here because once again, like, you don't want a 6.5-year-old terrified of life. Like you want her aware and feeling equipped to handle situations, but it's not her job to be scared that every person who walks by her is a bad person.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you have as many or more conversations about, okay, so we're in the grocery store. Who would be safe? Mommy's safe? Who else might be safe? How would we know? You know what I mean? Like it's sort of helping again the side of her that can have confidence in her decision making,
Mm.
or how to get help.
Yeah, but no, it's a tricky balance, and like you said from the beginning of this conversation, is I just think inviting more conversations with other people who are in the same boat as you, or maybe they have more life experience or less. But I think the more we talk about our experiences and how we feel about things and how we're navigating things, I think it's powerful. That connection with others. I
Really?
think people don't value it enough sometimes.
I totally agree with you. I get excited when I think about a whole group of parents going through the Shameless Parenting book and reading the books and saying, okay, between this week and next week, let's go get the books at the library and then let's read them to ourselves and to our kids. And then let's come back and talk about how was that similar or different to what we got when we were that age, and
Yeah.
just support each other in doing it in a way that does equip them and equips their kids to celebrate their life and be able to keep themselves safe, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's powerful stuff when you can get there. But for anyone listening, you've mentioned these wonderful books. Where is the best place to find them and find you so
Yeah.
that people can get that bit of information now?
Sure. So both books you can find them on Amazon if you want. You can also take the titles to your library or to an independent bookseller and ask them to get it for you if it's not on their shelf. Some people are happy to do that. If there's anybody out there that can't afford either one of the books and really wants to have their own copy, they can DM me at Instagram. I'm at Dr. Tina Shameless, so DRTINA Shameless, and just let me know and I can send an Audible promo code so you can at least listen to it. I don't want anybody to wish they could and not be able to afford it for any reason. So I'm happy to do that. And then, yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. And I usually try to post if I've had a conversation or a podcast or something so people can get at that. I think right now, some of the things that I post is more having to do with worrying about people around the world and how we are not taking care of them. And so you will see a lot of that coming off because it is a part of what I care about and worry about. But I'm available, happy to have people write and ask questions or even say, I would love to hear you address this more. And then I'm happy to do stuff around that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll make sure we put that all in the show notes too, so it's easy for people to find. But Tina, thank you so much for your time today. It's been such a lovely and insightful conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. It's been great to have this conversation with you. Feels really important, and I'm glad you're practicing all this stuff yourself. That's so great.
Well, that's all we have time for today, but thank you so much for tuning in and joining us once again. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and leave a review on your favorite podcast streaming site or share with someone who you think could benefit from this episode. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media at Healthy Not Hungry or Healthy Not Hungry Podcast.